Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to the Cowboy Coach podcast, where we share stories, experiences, life lessons, and basically BS to find some sort of take-home message that we can all apply to our personal and professional lives. This podcast is to help you take back the reins of your story so that you can create the life that you want to live. Pull up your boots, tighten up your cinch, climb up on that saddle, and enjoy the ride. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to the Cowboy Coach podcast. I am your host, John Anderson, aka Cowboy Coach. The Cowboy Coach is my business. It's my personal development, leadership, team building, sales training company that I work with mainly within agriculture industry because frankly, that's who I relate to. That's my background. Those are my people. And there's not a whole lot of podcasts out there for the ranchers, the farmers, folks in the agriculture industry in personal development, leadership, sales, team building. So here I am coming to you with an episode that is near, or with, I guess not an episode, a conversation, a concept that's near and dear to my heart. So if you guys know anything about my background, I used to ride bulls. I used to train horses. I think that's what you're supposed to do. If you ride bulls, I think you're supposed to train horses. No, I'm joking, but that's I used to ride bulls. Met a lot of great people. In fact, when I was riding bulls, the reason I met one of my biggest mentors, one of the biggest influencers in my life is because I used to ride bulls, and because I rode bulls, it kind of gave me the invitation to meet this guy. Okay, so long time ago when I was in college, my first year, second year of college, about sophomore year in college, my dad actually had met this guy, this horse trainer. His name was Gary, and he met him through one of our clients that we sold a horse to, because Dad and I used to raise horses. We used to have a ton of mares, a stud, and sometimes we would sell those horses, those colts, those fillies that we raised, and we'd sell them to folks. Not all the time, because Dad would grow attached to them, and then we'd keep them, and then we just kept expanding our herd, never letting go of any of them. But one of the very few horses, and if you're into horses, you guys know, if you breed in horses, you know exactly what I mean. Sometimes, not me, but sometimes other folks get too attached, and it's hard to let them go, so you end up keeping them forever. But one of the horses we did let go, great horse. We sent it to this guy that was actually locally, and he took him to this horse trainer and got him. And this horse trainer really did a pretty good job of starting this horse. And so this client of ours brought my dad to the horse trainer just as a brief introduction, or just to kind of know who this guy was, who this horse trainer was. And apparently, when they were having a conversation and getting to know each other, my dad said, "Well, I got this son. He trains all of our horses right now, and he's riding bulls for South Dakota State University." And I guess Gary's, the horse trainer's, eyes lit up. He's like, "Really?" And Gary's a guy that really likes to mentor folks, and did a lot of work training people how to start horses, how to be colt starters and train horses, maybe more effectively, better. But anyways, so Gary talked to my dad and told my dad, and he said, "Hey, why don't you bring your son over here one time? I'd really like to meet him." So my dad called me up, and he's like, "Hey, I gave me a little bit of the background, the context of the situation." He goes, "I really think you should meet this guy. You should really see what he could do with horses." And I said, "All right, that sounds like fun. I loved horses. I like training them, and didn't really know what I was doing. I never really had any guidance, So I guess a little bit of history of how I started breaking horses is I started breaking horses like my dad taught me. My dad learned how to break horses from his dad, and my grandpa learned how to break horses from his dad, and so on and so forth. And there's no real professional training on how we broke horses. So basically what Dad and I would do is how we'd break horses, and it varied a little bit over the years, but essentially it was kind of, we just cowboyed them. Right, we just kind of got on them and rode the buck out, and hopefully they just started doing it if with enough force and enough pulling and prodding and poking and spanking, we'd finally get the horse to do what we wanted him to do. And then once that happened, we called him broke, and then we just rode him. And they didn't have a whole lot of buttons. They didn't really have a whole lot of really anything. Looking back, I'm like, how did we survive on some of these horses that we broke? Okay, because what we would literally do, guys, is we'd go like in the spring. In the spring, you know, like so if your background is in ranching or farming, or you guys can understand where I'm coming from. But in the spring, when everything is wet and muddy, we would bring the horse, one that's not broke, that we haven't trained, we'd bring him to a plowed field. We'd find a plowed field in the area. My grandpa would farm a little bit, but otherwise we had the neighbor farmer. We didn't really farm. We just had horses. But the neighbor farmer would have a plowed field or like a dug field, and it'd be pretty darn wet in the spring. And if you've ever walked through a plowed field in the spring when it's wet, it's really mucky and muddy. Okay, and it's really hard to walk in. So Dad and I, we didn't always do things right, but we're not the smartest folks in the world, I would say. But we were smart enough to try to take the leverage out of the horse when they were bucking. So we would bring the horse, the colt, to the plowed field, saddled up, and that's where we'd get on, right? And we'd get on, and if the horse went to bucking or running, it wouldn't last long because it was hard to walk through. It was hard to buck. It was hard to run in a plowed field because you'd sink. It'd be so muddy and mucky, right? So we took all the power and the energy out of the horse. The only thing is you had to stay on. You had to ride the horse long enough before it got to the ditch or to the field, because if it got to the ditch or the field, then it was a whole new ball game. Then the horse had all the power. And hopefully you had a good enough seat where you could hang on till the horse stopped bucking. But that didn't happen very often, because you just basically take the energy out of the horse. You take the try out of the horse, and essentially then you could start kind of pulling it around, kind of plow reining the thing around, and the horse would kind of pick up on what you're asking. And that's how Dad and I broke them. You know, if we had a real gentle horse that you could kind of do anything with, and there's a lot of those horses that we had. You could, like one time I remember I was working this horse. I was like 12 or 13 years old, and we had this new horse. We always broke our horses in the spring when they're about 2 years old. Now I do it a little bit different. I usually, kind of depends on the size and maturity of the horse, is when I'll start them. But that's maybe for another day. But there's one horse that I remember is actually one of my favorite horses. Become like a family member to me. But I was 12 or 13, and one day Dad was like, "Hey, let's just go saddle up this horse. Let's just go see what he can do." His name was Mick, and we threw a saddle on him. It didn't do nothing, didn't buck or anything. He was pretty calm. So we're like, "Well, John, why don't you get on?" And I'm like, "Are you serious, Dad? Like, you want me to get on this horse? Like, he's never had a saddle. Like, this is the first time he's had a saddle on. Never broke. I mean, his halter broke, and that's it." And so Dad's like, "Yeah, I'll hold him. I'll hold him." And I was like, "All right, well." When I was that young, I thought Dad was the strongest man in the world. So if the horse got to bucking, he would stop it. He would hold the horse down. So I trusted Dad, and I got on. And much to my surprise, the horse just stood there. It didn't buck. I had a good hold of the horn, good hold of the reins. We had a halter on it, so Dad could kind of have somewhat of control. But the horse just stood there, and I stood there, and both the horse and I were probably too afraid to move because we didn't know what was going on. This is the first time I've ever been on a horse like just that hasn't been ridden before. not been under saddle before. And so we're standing there, and Dad kind of looks at the horse. He looks at me, and he's like, "Are you good?" And I said, I think so." And so Dad walks away. And he walks away, and he goes, gets a beer from the house. And he comes back out, and the horse and I haven't moved a muscle. We're afraid to move because we're both terrified. But this horse just stays there. Dad comes back, pets the horse, and is like, "Oh, that's good." And then starts leading the horse around. And the horse, Mick, never offered a buck, never did anything, just kind of led around like I wasn't. I mean, granted, I'm 12 or 13 years old. At this point, I'm maybe 70, 80 pounds. I'm a little guy. Back in the day, I wasn't much. I wasn't big either. So 70, 80, 90 pounds. I don't know. Probably 100 pounds total on the back of this horse. Nonetheless, still foreign to the horse, but the horse didn't do anything. So, not very often did that happen, but we lucked out. Anyway, so back to the original point of what I'm trying to share here, because so I met Gary. I met that horse trainer that Dad introduced me to, and I met him, and I really, I respect him right off the bat because he showed me what he could do with a horse. I didn't know that a horse could move in ways that this horse could move, that Gary was on and showing me. And he went through the 10 cues, showed me how you could move the different parts of the horse. It's not just forwards and backwards and left and right. Like you can move him in very specific ways. I mean, what I now call basics. You can move the head and neck. You can move the hindquarters. You can move the forequarters. You can make him side pass, left and right. You can do all the things, right? And those are the basic things. I know there's a more advanced movements back then, but that's what he showed me, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. How could you make a horse move specifically like that? And so instantly, my respect, I had respect for Gary, the horse trainer. And so what happened is I spent, that was like a middle of the summer of my sophomore year of college. And I was already working for a local farmer, a neighbor farmer. So there's plenty to do with the farmer, plenty to do around our little ranch that Dad and I had with our horses. So there really wasn't a whole lot of spare time to do anything else. But what I did is after I got done working for the neighbor farmer, I would drive 45 minutes to go see Gary, and Gary would teach me how to work horses. And I did this until I went back to school, and then I'd go anytime I had a day off from college, anytime I had a weekend free, vacation, like holidays, I'd go to Gary's and I'd work horses and I would learn from him. And then the next summer, I spent all summer, lived in an apartment that the guy had out in one of his sheds. I lived out there and worked. And back then, I didn't keep track of all the horses that I worked. Gary did, because that's what he kept track of every single horse that he rode in a journal or a sheet of paper or something. And oftentimes we reflect back, and Gary says, yeah, that summer we worked close to 70 horses. That's 70 horses. And that's now that I know now, that's way too many horses to be working, especially if you want to put out good quality. But I worked like a dog that summer. And we helped a lot of horses. We helped a lot of people. And I learned a lot. And some of the greatest lessons, whether it's leadership lessons in life, lessons about myself, for the horses I learned that summer. But horses, I have to give a lot of credit to horses for teaching me what I know now about leadership and personal development. And what I learned about horses came from Gary. I mean, I knew Grandpa taught me a lot about horses, but really like the advanced, and I don't know if call it advanced, but maybe just a little bit a step up from the basics. Because I'm not claiming to be a great horse trainer. I'm not claiming to know a lot about horses, right? But some of the greatest lessons that I have ever learned in life came from Gary. And every day I would say not a day goes by that I don't think of this one lesson that I learned from Gary. And it come from a time when I was just starting to work with Gary, just kind of getting to know him, kind of getting to understand how he worked horses, and so he was teaching me. And I would say it's probably the second or third day that I started working with him, right? Second or third evening that I was working with him, and we had this horse in the round pen, okay, and he had a small round pen. It was like 30 feet diameter. I would consider that a smaller, but it was a pretty nice size for when you're starting colts. You can have a pretty good handle on them. But we got this new horse, and they're this young horse, and so Gary thought it would be a good idea to have me start this horse and learn how to start horses by starting this horse. So we got this young horse in there, and it's in the round pen, and Gary puts me in there, and he's kind of just kind of testing me to see what I know and what I don't. So I'm in the middle of this round pen, and this horse is in the round pen, and a few minutes go by. And I'm supposed to be working this horse. I'm supposed to be teaching this horse. And a few minutes go by, and I guess before I get too far ahead of myself, how Gary and I now start horses is the first thing we try to do is establish the relationship. We establish the leadership role, right? And we are the leader, the horse is the follower, right? So like in the relationship, the horse does what we tell it to do. We are the leaders, okay? And so how we first start establishing leadership is we get him in a round pen and we establish direction and speed. Okay, direction and speed. And we do that in the round pen. Okay, so I'm in this round pen and I'm in the middle of the round pen. Well, kind of sort of in the middle of the round pen, and the horse is in the inside perimeter of the round pen, and I'm running around the round pen like crazy. I'm running after this horse. I'm trying to get it to turn directions. I'm trying to get it to go clockwise. I'm trying to get it to go counterclockwise. I'm trying to get it to turn towards me and not give me 2 feet, but give me eyes, right, for respect, and trying to establish speed. I'm trying to establish like a walk and a trot and like a little bit of a lope or a canter, but it's just chaos. Like I'm running around with like a head cut off a chicken. And the horse is doing the same. The horse is running around like crazy. We're both getting sweated up. We're both like breathing heavy, out of breath, wide eye. And the horse has got its head way up in the air, trying to look over the 7-foot panels on this round pen, looking for the easiest, the fastest way out of this thing to get away from this crazy guy that's running after him, clucking and kissing and waving his hands around, hooting and hollering, trying to get away from this, trying to get away from me. And several minutes go by of this like circus, this chaos, this, I don't even know what you would call it other than just sheer chaos. But several minutes go by and I'm tired, I'm out of breath, and I'm frustrated. And finally I stop and I turn to Gary. And because Gary would always watch me, and I mean, and he's trying to teach me how to work horses. And so I turned to Gary and I said, Gary, why is this horse not doing anything it's supposed to be doing? Gary, he tells me, he goes, stop. And Gary walks in, and he comes in the round pen with me. And he comes in the middle with me, and he tells me 2 things. And he goes, John, he goes, watch what I do, but stay out of my way. And I was like, okay, well, this guy's about 70 years old, roughly about 70. I really don't know what his age is at this time, maybe 65, 70. I mean, he's retired and he's training horses and working with young kids like myself as kind of a hobby and what he likes to do. Okay. And so you would think staying out of this guy's way, this older gentleman's way, would be easy. Not only is he older, but he's got Parkinson's. I mean, it's in very early stages of Parkinson's at this point, but still, he's got Parkinson's. So I think that would be easy. But little did I know that once he gets in a round pen and once he starts working a horse, and to this day, once he starts working a horse, even though he doesn't have the coordination, he doesn't have the stamina, he doesn't have the balance anymore like he used to, right? There's oftentimes he can barely walk. But once he gets with a horse, like he gets to a different level. Okay. And so Gary starts working this horse. And I'm thinking, okay, so two things. Watch what he does. Okay, stay out of his way. And I'm thinking, easy enough. Gary starts working his horse. And I find it hard to stay out of his way, to not bump into him. And he's kind of getting frustrated with me because I'm not moving fast enough to get out of his way. Because somehow he turned into Usain Bolt. And he's like faster than heck. And he's moving quick. And so I'm trying to stay out of his way. I can't hardly even pay attention or focus on what he's doing. But after a couple minutes of this, all of a sudden I notice something. I notice that the horse all of a sudden becomes more calm. The horse drops his head. I no longer see the whites of his eyes. The horse starts licking his lips. And the horse is moving with fluidity, I think you could say. Fluidity and grace. And now I notice Gary. Gary's moving with a little bit more fluidity and grace. And it's control. Like, it's not chaos like it was before. It's a controlled environment now. And if I were to be honest, it was like one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Because it was like art. It was like a dance between man and beast. Between Gary and this horse. And like, as I'm talking about it right now, I'm literally getting goosebumps when I'm reflecting back on this. And I've told this story several times because it's a huge life lesson that I learned. But I'm watching this dance go on between Gary and this horse. And finally, like, even though it was so graceful, it was so artistic, it was so beautiful, I'm frustrated. Because I'm thinking to myself, why is the horse now doing what it's supposed to be doing? And so I stopped Gary. I said, Gary, why is the horse doing what it's supposed to be doing now when it didn't with me? And Gary stops. And this is where he tells me one of the most important things I've ever heard in my life. I didn't know the meaning of it. I didn't know the power of it. I didn't know the weight that it carried until years later. Okay? I didn't know that it went beyond a horse training lesson. But he tells me this. He goes, John, most folks, when they're working a horse, whether it's in the round pen, the arena, or just outside, anywhere, whenever they're around a horse, most folks, they see the horse, but they don't see themselves. They see the horse, but they don't see themselves. Now, I understood from a horse training perspective what that meant. What I did not understand is the power of that, of what Gary was actually teaching me in that moment. It didn't come till years later after I broke my leg training a horse and kind of feeling sorry for myself and getting called out by some folks that are real close to me. But essentially, because see what happens, and what I see a lot of with the clients that I coach, or just looking around today in society, in the world, I see a lot of folks. They blame everything else but themselves for the results that they are getting. Take a look around. There's not a whole lot of people that are taking credit, that are taking accountability, taking responsibility for the results that they're getting. They blame everybody and everything for the results or lack thereof that they're getting in their life, right? They'll blame the government for what's going on. They'll blame the government for paying too much taxes or not enough money in their bank. They'll blame their boss for not paying them more, not appreciating them more, for taking them for granted. They blame their spouse for their lack of happiness or fulfillment at home. They blame their kids for the lack of energy because they keep them up. They blame their friends. They'll blame their parents for not teaching them the right things when they were younger. Or they'll blame their parents for not giving them the right childhood, for not setting them up right. See, we live in a culture, we live in a society, we live in a world where everyone is quick to blame everybody else for everything that's happening to them in their life. And the thing is, what happens is when we blame everybody, when we blame everybody else or everything else for our results, what we're doing is we're giving up our control. We're giving up our control and we're giving up our power. Because what happens is when we blame somebody else for our results, that means we're giving them the control and we're giving them all the power for our life, for our results. And we have to rely on them to change, for them to do something different in order for us to get the results that we want to have, in order for us to live the life that we want to live, to create the life we want to create. We're relying on everything else and everybody else to change for our lives to change. And therefore, we give up our power. One thing I know, just experience or just doing what I do, is everybody else has got their own problems. Everybody else has got their own life. Everyone else has got a lot of things going on that they're too busy worrying about their own life, their own problems, than to worry about yours, to worry about ours. So if we're expecting somebody, if we're waiting for somebody to make a change, to help me get what I want out of life, to help me get more of the results that I want, chances are we are going to be waiting a long time. Long time. See, back in that round pen, when Gary and I were in the middle of the round pen, when he told me that most people, they see the horse, but they don't see themselves, what he was really telling me is most people will blame the results on the horse. Most people will blame the results on everything else but themselves. They don't see themselves in the picture. They don't actually see how they are responsible, how we are responsible for our results. See, what Gary was actually telling me, he goes, we are 100% responsible for everything that happens to us in our life. And I know that may that may hurt a little bit. You might get a little bit defensive. I did right away when I first realized this. But we are. It's the truth. We are 100% responsible for everything that happens to us in our life. Now, I'm not saying that everything is our fault. I'm not saying that. It may or may not be your fault. It may or may not be my fault. It may or may not be our fault. That's a debate for later. And the thing is, it doesn't matter whose fault it is, whether it is my fault or if it is somebody else's, if it's the government's, our bosses, our coworkers, our spouse, our parents, our kids, or whatever. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. Maybe it could be the horse's fault. It could be. But it doesn't matter because we are 100% responsible, meaning we have the ability to respond to whatever happens to us. I'm going to say that again. We have the ability to respond to whatever happens to us, no matter what happens to us. We cannot change the past. We cannot change other people. The only thing that we can do is we can't control others, right? We have very little can we control in this world, and really the only thing that we can control is ourselves, and sometimes we can't even control that. But we are responsible for how we react to a certain situation, to every situation in our life. We are 100% responsible. We have the ability to respond. So whatever happens to us in our life, we can choose how we want to respond. We get to choose. And I know a lot of us say, well, he or she made me do that. Or this thing made me do that. Or the horse made me do this. The government made me do this. The spouse, the coworker, the boss made me do this or that. But the thing is, nobody made you do something other than yourself. You're the one that chose how to respond. So whatever happens to you in life, you're 100% responsible because you can respond. You can choose how you want to respond. And the thing is when we take 100% responsible, what that does for us, it puts us back in the driver's seat because no longer do we have to rely on somebody else to change. We can change ourselves. We can change how we react. We can change how we act. We can change certain things in our life to get a different result, to get a different response, to create the life that we want to create. And when we take 100% responsibility, we take back our control. And when we take back our control, we take back our power. We take back our freedom. Because now we can live life on our own terms. We no longer have to rely on others. We take back that power. One of the greatest lessons I ever learned come from out in a ranch in South Dakota about being 100% responsible for your life. See, the thing is victimhood. Being a victim is one of the biggest addictions that we face in America, probably the entire world. Being a victim. Everybody wants to be a victim because they don't want to take responsibility. Because if they take responsibility, that means they have to have accountability. They have to take ownership of it. And it's easier to blame somebody else for our results, somebody else for the life that we're living, than to take responsibility. But I think the world would be better off if we all just took a little bit more responsibility for our life, a little bit more responsibility for our actions. If we chose how to respond to everything that happens to us in life. So that's a message I wanted to share with you all today. One of the greatest lessons I learned that goes beyond just horse training, goes beyond the farm. It's a great principle that we can all adapt to our life. So, with that being said, I hope this meant something to you. Hope you took something away from this episode of the Cowboy Coach podcast. If you want to know more, please reach out to me. You can go to cowboycoach.com or you can email me at john@thecowboycoach.com. We can set up a meeting, have a conversation. I'd love to hear from y'all. Let me know. But with that being said, take care. God bless.